My best friend and I love camping and hiking adventures. We are not as adept as some, but enjoy crashing at rural campgrounds and long days of collecting mountain peaks. There is absolutely nothing better than a full day out in the woods hiking and moving your body, then going back to your campsite for a campfire meal and a good night's sleep. One trip to the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, we chose a campsite at the back of the grounds that was heavily shaded. There were also not too many people this weekend, and we were nice and isolated in our corner of the grounds near a trailhead that led into the High Peaks wilderness. The next day, we hiked up that trail, a good 8 miles and 3,000 feet of elevation gain. While we were on top of the mountain peak taking in the nature around us, we got sucked in. For those who don't know, getting sucked in is when the clouds or fog become so dense that you can see nothing from the peak but a wall of white. This fog rolled in so fast, it not only obscured our view of the valley, but we lost our visibility in general. Holding up my hand, it appeared through what looked like a cottony filter. Danielle and I were surprised by how fast the fog rolled in and decided to head down the mountain. It was evening, but the descent would take until nightfall with clear visibility. Danielle and I were surprised by how fast the fog rolled in and decided to head down the mountain. It was evening, but the descent would take until nightfall with clear visibility. Danielle put the red light on her headlamp, and that helped us to see the overall rocks and roots. But I only had a flashlight, absolutely useless in the fog. As it got darker out, she basically needed to lead me. What's strange is that, as we descended in elevation, the fog should have lessened. It didn't. Instead, the scent of rot, like a dead animal near the trail, grew stronger and stronger. But there was no escaping it because we had to stay on the trail. Bushwhacking would only get us lost, and we were not prepared to sleep on the cold mountain as temperatures dipped near freezing. Despite the stench, we decided to take a short rest and then get a move on. That's when the silence kicked in. The heaviness that comes deep in nature, but also when there's something amiss. Danielle suddenly said, "What's that?" This girl has no sense of urgency, but she was scared. I looked where she pointed, but didn't see anything. She didn't want to tell me what she thought she saw, and was suddenly embarrassed. Then I saw it. 2 red eyes glowing through the fog, just about level with the brush. We took off running down the mountain. Now we were so freaked and the fog was so overwhelming, we could see nothing. We hung on to trees as gravity pulled us downhill. Behind us came this deep creaking, like when an old tree sways in the wind. I glanced back. The eyes rose to the height of about 8 or 9 feet, and long arms and antlers stirred the fog as it moved through the trees. We scrambled down the mountain, the creature moving through the fog along the trail, closing in on us. Danielle stumbled on a rock and thought quickly. She picked it up and threw it right at the creature's glowing red eye. Its howl was otherworldly, hollow and angry. We took off again, gaining distance on the creature as its howls faded into the distance. When we reached our campsite, which, remember, was at the trailhead for the trail we just climbed, we lit a fire and ate in silence. The creak of every branch made us jump. Then Danielle asked, "Do you think we should sleep in the car tonight?" I agreed, though neither of us got much sleep that night. I used to not believe that there was unknown stuff in the woods. I thought maybe Bigfoot, maybe, could be real, but I severely doubted it. After this happened, I know there's something unknown out there. I had just bought my first AR-15 style rifle and bought a 60-round drum magazine. Reading up on the drum, I read they were amazing and rarely had any issues at all. A few days after I got it, I finally decided to take it out for a test drive and sight in my gun a little better. Here's where everything went to hell. Kentucky is super wooded. 3/4 of the land I live on was just thick woods. There was a main path for driving our gator and a few small paths our cows had made in the woods. I decided to walk along our creek that had a small path half cleared out by our cows. At the end of the path is a big field our cows graze in, and where I sight in guns when the cows aren't there. As soon as I crossed the fence to go to the field, I instantly felt like I was being watched closely. I brushed it off because I've walked back there 1,000 times before and never been bothered by anything. So I keep walking and ignore the feeling of being watched, but at the same time, I'm aware of the feeling. I know I feel like I'm being watched, but I wasn't giving it any noticeable attention. The walk to the field along the creek is a very short walk, maybe 2 minutes at a slow pace. About halfway there, the feeling got so intense I couldn't ignore it anymore. The drum magazine I had with me was unloaded, so I stopped and started loading it. The exact moment I started putting rounds in the drum, I smelled something dead, like it had been dead for a while and rotting in the sun. I started looking around, and right behind me was what was left of a possum. It was torn to pieces. It was almost like it was placed there for me to find. The only thing was, it looked like it had been dead for maybe a day at most, and what I was smelling seemed like it was far more decomposed. I decided to keep going. I had never had any problems back there before, so I assumed my brain was just being paranoid. Just as I was near the end of the creek at the edge of the woods, I heard a splash in the water. Me being on edge, immediately turned towards the noise, gun ready but no round in the chamber. Walking down the creek away from me was something I will never forget. At least 8 feet tall, probably taller, very skinny. Imagine a grown man that weighs 120 pounds. Now stretch him out to be 8 feet tall, but his body width stays the same. Very long arms, and it walked on 2 legs. Skin stretched tightly across its body. It also had a weird walk, almost like a waddle, but taking large steps. It was also a light brown color, almost like the color of a deer. Now I know why I felt like I was being watched. Magazine loaded, bolt ready to send around in the chamber. Remember what I said about the magazine being extremely reliable? I pressed the bolt release on the gun and chamber around just in case this monstrous thing decides to attack. The round gets stuck somehow and doesn't even budge out of the magazine. Gun jammed on the first round. The thing books it out of there without running or making a noise. It happened about late May last year. As for what the creature was, me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do have decided that it could have been a Wendigo. The reason we think Wendigo is because everything I described matched them near perfectly. I had read that they are incredibly thin and tall, have a stench of death that follows them everywhere, very fast, can be several colors, light brown included, and that they sometimes violently kill other animals to scare humans. The only thing that we couldn't come up with is its behavior. Why am I still alive? Wendigos are supposed to be incredibly aggressive. Aside from watching me, it did nothing. This being said, I've never had another encounter with it. I have gone to the same field, taking the same path, expecting to be watched, and have not gotten that feeling of being watched as strongly as that day. Something was out there, and you can't convince me otherwise. I'm an animal control officer for a rural county. I cover an area that has isolated communities of people who don't trust outsiders. I say this because after this call, I couldn't get anyone to talk to me. In dealing with these communities, I had some rather strange calls. One such call was made by a woman whose family had moved into one of these places. She and her husband were doctors, and since rural doctors are hard to come by, she and her husband wanted to fill that need. A problem that the doctors ran into was a number of animals that were allowed to run loose. This triggered several calls from the woman to me about aggressive dogs. The last call I received from her would also be one of the most terrifying. I was called once again about an aggressive animal, but this time she wasn't sure if it was a dog or not. She'd made a house call to a family that lived at the end of a long dirt road. When she stepped into the house, things got weird. She told me that while she was doing a checkup on the children, she heard a growling noise coming from behind a wall. When she asked the family about it, they quickly escorted her out of the house. The doctor had warned me that the road was poorly maintained, and I knew immediately that she hadn't been exaggerating. The first pothole I hit, I thought I was going to tear off my front tire. I slowed down further until I was going about 2 miles an hour. By the time I got to the end of the road, my teeth were rattling. I grabbed my gear and stepped out of my truck. I looked around, and all I could see was trees. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and regardless of how warm it was, a shiver crawled its way down my back. I took a deep breath and shook the feeling off. The doctor had told me the house was half a mile from the end of a dirt road. As I walked down the path, I became aware of the lack of sound. Usually, I would hear birds, bugs, or animals moving through the underbush. Now, there was nothing to hear except my footsteps. I kept looking around me, hoping to spot any sign of life, but I was out of luck. All I could see was the sun shining down through the trees, and I could feel the temperature rising as the morning wore on. Then, as I got closer to the house, I could hear the sound of children playing and animals calling out. I felt myself sag in relief at the sounds of life after such a quiet walk. The relief didn't last long, though, because as I pushed through the trees into a clearing, I saw that there was no one there. I froze and looked around. I could see paddocks and an old barn that looked like it was about to fall. Away off from that, I saw the house in question. It was dilapidated, much like the barn. But now I was starting to wonder if I'd been sent on a wild goose chase. This looked nothing like what the doctor had described. "This is animal control. Is there anyone home?" I called out as I moved further into the clearing. The silence was my only answer. I moved closer to the paddock and I jumped back with a small cry. Laying in the paddock was a freshly dead cow. But not just any cow. It had 3 massive claw marks down its side. On top of that, its eyes were bulging out along with its tongue. The cow looked as if it had been choked and clawed to pieces. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't think of anyone strong enough to choke out a cow. I reached the rotting front porch and stopped before climbing the stairs. The front door was hanging on by one hinge, and the windows were broken. It looked like no one had been here in many years. "Hello, this is Animal Control. Is anyone home?" I called out another time. Of course, I didn't get an answer, and I was about to call off the search. Before I could turn around, I heard the sound again, and it sounded like it was getting closer. I poured out my flashlight and shone the light through the open doorway. All I could see was debris from the forest and a thick layer of dust on the floor. I stepped closer to the door, and the porch let out an alarming creak. I froze, but the door held. By now, I was calling myself an idiot for not leaving already. The cry came again, so I forced myself to step through the door. Inside, it looked like the family had simply disappeared. Everything was still in its place. In the corner of the room, there was even a dinner sitting on the dining table. All that I could hear was my increasing heart rate and the air moving in and out of my lungs. This quiet didn't sound natural to me, and my uneasiness was growing. I decided that now would be a good time to pull out my gun. I moved past the kids' rooms with the largest bedroom at the end of the hall, and I saw blood smeared across the wall behind the bed. It was in the shape of large claw marks, and I tensed at the second sign of violence. I looked around the room, and my eyelids slid across a shadow. I brought the flashlight up, hoping that I was seeing things. No luck, because sitting in the corner was an animal as tall as me sitting down, and on each of its front feet were 3 massive claws. The muscles of the front legs looked strong enough to strangle a hippo, much less a cow. The creature gave a low cry, and I went cold. It sounded like a child crying. I started backing towards the door, and the creature stood up. I could see instantly I was right about the size. I watched in horror as it opened its mouth and started panting. It had rows of massive teeth, and even from where I was, the smell was horrible. Its back legs were as muscled as its front legs, and I wondered how I could outrun this thing if I had to do so. I took another step back, and the creature stepped forward. It felt like some kind of strange dance as I walked backward, and the creature matched my steps. I brought my gun up and leveled it on the creature. I had a feeling that it was waiting for me to let down my gun. At the sight of it, the creature lunged for me, and I quickly fired off 2 shots. The creature fell back with a deafening roar. I used this opportunity to turn and run, not taking time to find out where I hit the creature. I knew I had wounded it, so I was hoping it was enough for me to get away. As I ran towards the door, I could hear the creature trying to get up. It was making these awful whimpering and crying noises. It sounded so much like a child in extreme pain that I almost turned back. I found a place to hide, and I waited anxiously for the creature to find me. After 10 minutes, I clutched my gun in my right hand and cautiously stepped out of my hiding place. I looked around, but the coast was clear. As I walked, I could have sworn that there was something behind me. Every time I checked, though, there was nothing there. I still jumped to every sound, and I was constantly checking behind me. Although it had been quiet when I first walked down the path, now it sounded like every branch in the forest was cracking. Somehow I made it back to my truck unharmed. When I stopped to catch my breath near the truck, I saw to my horror that there were 3 long claw marks down the side of the driver's door. I quickly fumbled my keys out of my pocket, something I knew I should have done already. I managed to get the door open without dropping the keys. Once the door was opened, I scrambled inside. I was desperate for some water, but before I could reach my thermos, I saw movement. I looked up and saw the creature was watching me. I swallowed a scream at the sight. I felt the creature was playing with me. It started moving forward, and I frantically turned the truck on. I jerked it into reverse and made the fastest turnaround I've ever done in my life. As I started forward, I saw the creature stop. I made it back home in record time. I ran into my house and placed a call to the doctor that had sent me to that house. I desperately wanted answers, and she was the only one to have them. Instead of the woman doctor, a confused elderly woman answered the phone. I asked for the doctor, and the elderly woman told me that she'd lived in her house for 50 years. She also told me that the phone number I called had been hers for the past 20 years. I apologized for bothering her and hung up the phone. I was now confused and terrified. I made some more calls, but everyone I talked to said they didn't know who I was talking about. I don't know who I'd been talking to, but it wasn't a doctor wanting to help some unfortunate people. I never went back to that house. Some instinct was telling me why the creature had let me go. It wanted me to bring more people to investigate. Therefore, that would be more food for him. I had no intention of doing that. For one, who would believe me? And two, I may be a bit stubborn, but I'm not stupid. I had gotten away once, but I doubt I would get away again. So, like 4 years ago, a step-cousin of mine and some of his stupid friends started a wildfire in a small forest. We always thought it was horrible, and we could see the burnt stumps from the highway when we went to pick up my mom from the school she works at. I am sure the forest fire is what made this thing come out of hiding. That year, a wave of unalivings burst on the town where her tiny school is located. I don't know if it can be related to the thing I saw and heard, but I am pretty sure that if you were being stalked by that creature, not many people would want to keep going. So now the actual encounters. It was late at night. I was in my room, the last one on the second floor of my house, watching YouTube videos. Because of the pandemic, the car flow on the highway in front of my house had dropped massively, so it was weirdly silent. Suddenly, I heard crunching on the leaves on the ground. It usually wouldn't scare me because we have cats and they love leaves. But then I sadly realized the crunches were slow footsteps and they were getting closer and closer to my bedroom. Then I felt the stench. It was like that one time we forgot a piece of meat in one of our cabinets. I am paralyzed. I have rhinitis, so my sense of smell is stronger than that of a normal human. The stench is making me gag, and then I hear it. 3 knocks on my window. 3 knocks made by some hard object. They were soft enough to be as if someone hit their nail against a huge glass window of a balcony that my dad never finished. It could not have been a stick or a branch because my dad cut most of the branches next to my window earlier that day. I just laid there silently, trying to take a glimpse of it through the mirror that is in front of the window, but the curtains won't let me. After a few minutes, I could hear the crunches get away. The day after, I went to our laundry room. That's a space with no walls behind the back of my house, and my room as a roof. I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me. Then I heard my mom calling me from the trees near the neighbor's house. I was certain my mom was inside the house, so I picked up the clothes basket and ran inside. It's been a few months and I still feel weird while remembering this, especially while writing it, since stories say that when you say their name and spread their tails, it's like inviting them in. I am scared. Thanks for joining me, Madam Horror, for your bedtime scary stories. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps a lot. If you have a story you would like read on this channel, send it to me at madamhorror1@gmail.com. Join me next week for more stories of the unknown.